I don't think I know anyone who doesn't love shrimp crackers. They must be one of the crispiest things on the planet, and since crispy is by far my favorite texture in food, I just had to know. What kind of sorcery makes krupuk work, and is it possible to make it from scratch? Well, the short answer is yes. These are my premium homemade prawn crackers, which I haven't tasted yet, but I will towards the end of the video, so they better be good. But the long answer to the krupuk mystery is actually much more interesting, because understanding how to make krupuk at home means understanding the science of crispy. Let's start basic. Most Asian grocery stores will be selling at least a few types of krupuk, which is a very popular type of cracker in Southeast Asia and a few neighboring regions. Prawn just happens to be the most popular kind of krupuk, but in Indonesia, for example, there are entire shops only dedicated to krupuk, and it comes in tons of different shapes, colors, and flavors. What restaurants use and what you can also buy at the store is kind of raw krupuk. It comes in the form of these little chips, which are very, very hard and almost feel like plastic. You drop them in hot oil, and within just a few seconds, they magically puff up and create a light and a very mildly shrimpy, crispy chip with an absolutely stellar texture. Seriously guys, freshly fried krupuk is definitely up there with my favorite savory snacks of all time. But all of that is no big secret. What I want to know actually goes a step further. I want to know what kind of magic makes this turn into this in only a matter of seconds. When you check out the list of ingredients, you might actually be pleasantly surprised, because there's a little bit of shrimp and seasoning in here, but for the most part, this is just starch and water. But wait, you might be saying, how in the world is there water in this? Well, I'll explain. It's all about understanding the behavior of starch. Krupuk is often made with tapioca, a type of starch very common in Southeast Asia. It's extracted from the tuber of the cassava plant, which looks like this. But what I'm gonna tell you now does not just apply to tapioca. It applies to all types of starch in general. Because look, what we call starch is actually a powdery substance consisting of tiny, tiny granules. These are extremely fine, roughly 10 times finer than all-purpose flour, for example. Now let's actually zoom into the starch and look at it on a microscopic level. I know, this is just rice, but you know what? It turns out that rice is actually the perfect tool to talk about the behavior of starch, because guess what? White rice is, for the most part, just little nuggets of raw starch, and therefore it behaves as such. Look, in its raw form, not much is happening. Starch is just a powder. You can try to deep fry starch, good luck, except for some foaming, not much is gonna happen. You can also add it to water and mix them together, but they'll definitely separate again, because starch is insoluble in water. But actually that's only half correct, because starch is only insoluble in cold water. Once you actually heat the water, at a certain point, usually between 55 and 85 Celsius, depending on the starch, some complex chemistry happens. The starch granules swell up, explode, and their fragments bind with the water to create a sticky and viscous substance. The more starch you add, the thicker it will be. This process is called gelatinization, and it is brilliantly visualized by freshly cooked rice, which I think we know what that looks like. The starch has gelled up nicely and hydrated fully, and while it's fresh, it's gonna be soft and sticky. Now, if you want to, you can go ahead and deep fry that, the result of which I'm not sure anyone should be eating. It's just very gritty and just no. But here's the thing. Let's say you have some leftover rice from yesterday in the fridge. If you taste it straight out of the fridge, it's not gonna be the same tender rice, only colder. No, it's gonna be dry and chalky. Now what did the starch do this time? Thanks for asking. The answer is it retrograded. Okay, I admit I got this from Wikipedia, but here's what I think it means. When a sticky and gelatinized starch cools down, its molecules sort of realign back into like really firm crystals. But unlike with cooked rice, this time there's actually a lot of water that's being sort of trapped and enclosed within these crystals. So there's actually more moisture in that old rice than you think. You just gotta get it out of there somehow. And the best way to do that is to apply heat. When you heat water, As you might know, it starts turning into steam, and that steam is going to try to escape from within those crystals, which it eventually does, and on its way out, it sort of like rehydrates everything around it. And that is exactly the reason why when you make fried rice, yesterday's old rice will actually become tender once again. It is also the reason why taking a stale piece of bread and putting it in the toaster kind of brings the bread back to life. In short, cooked and cooled starch contains some water that's trapped in there, and that actually brings us one step closer to understanding the mystery of krupuk. So let's do two things. Step 1, we're going to air dry our starch or rice overnight. It's going to turn very dry and brittle. Now, don't be confused, there's still water trapped deep inside, but all the excess that was kind of on the surface has completely evaporated. And 2, instead of gently heating this in a toaster, we're going to throw this gelatinized, then retrograded, then air-dried starch into some hot frying oil, and guess what happens? The water trapped inside the rice steams up and expands so fast because of the heat that all the starch structures inside the rice literally explode and immediately get dried out and crisp up by the hot oil surrounding them. The result is this: lots of puffy little dry bubbles next to each other. And when we bite into them, all these layers and little clusters of starch break and collapse, creating the delicious, crispy sensation we all love. This was a completely edible puffy rice cracker right here. But how do we get from this sort of theoretical construct to, well, prawn crackers? Okay, so krupuk is literally made by mixing shrimps, seasoning, and starch, turning that into a paste, shaping it into long tubular cakes, then cooking or steaming them to gelatinize, letting them cool and retrograde, and then finally slicing them thinly and sun-drying. The result is this: a plasticky little raw cracker ready to get deep fried and puffy. Now, in theory, this process should be fairly easy to replicate at home, right? Well, almost. Some parts do require a little bit of tinkering, especially if you want like a round or oval krupuk. Getting the shape right can be pretty tricky because an uncooked starch slurry is so liquid and difficult to handle. But fortunately, after way too many failed attempts, I actually found a very easy and home-friendly workaround for this, which I borrowed from a traditional Thai technique for making rice crackers. And so, at last, here we are. This is how to make premium prawn crackers at home. We're starting with 250 grams of blanched shrimps and adding those into a food processor, together with a little bit of sugar, salt, and a touch of MSG, of course. I'm also gonna add 3 cloves of oven roasted garlic for extra flavor. Process everything into a smooth paste, and now here's our secret ingredient: 150 grams of freshly cooked rice. This is basically fully hydrated starch that has just gelatinized and hasn't retrograded yet, so it's right where we want it to be. Once that is smooth, you can already see that we have a sticky paste that can at least somewhat hold its shape. To this, we're gonna add about 100 grams of raw tapioca, and I also decided to add a little sprinkle of 5 spice and a few drops of sesame oil. Just couldn't help myself. We're gonna get this smooth and sort of shrimp-colored paste, which actually smells like a delicious Cantonese shrimp dumpling. Now we gotta shape those, and here's my preferred method. Spread around 250 grams of paste on a sheet of baking paper, then simply roll that up and twist the ends shut like you would with a sausage. Now these guys are super soft, but don't worry, they will firm up during the next step, which is steaming them for 1 full hour. They will come out impossibly hot, but also trust me, inside is the stickiest thing you have ever seen, so let this rest and cool down to room temperature. Now after 2 hours, I tried to remove the casing from one of them. It was still super sticky, but at least it was possible to handle. So I rolled that into plastic wrap to see if that would kind of help tighten and improve the shape, which it did, but it's an optional step. You now need to put your cakes in the fridge for at least 3 to 4 hours to cool completely. There is unfortunately no way around this. You gotta be patient. If you're not trying to slice them, it's gonna be a sticky and wobbly nightmare. Actually, you know what? Do yourself the favor and put them in the freezer for like an hour or maybe 2 before slicing. You're gonna have a much better chance of success with the next step, which is slicing the cakes into little discs between 1 and 2 millimeters thick. And now the final step to raw krupuk is to dry those. So I'm spreading these out on a dehydrator rack. Now, I know what you're thinking, and if you don't have a dehydrator, that's actually no big deal. You could, for example, put those in the oven on super low, like 50 or 60 degrees, fan on if you have that. And of course, traditionally, these were sun-dried, right? So you can definitely just put them anywhere where there's a little bit of airflow and let those air dry. Like next to a regular room fan is ideal, actually. Now, this drying step can take anywhere from like just a few hours to up to like 2 days. And it's gonna depend on your drying setup and how thinly you slice the crackers. They should definitely come out very, very dry and completely hardened. That's when you know they're done. The final step is, of course, to fry them. Simply heat some vegetable oil to 180 degrees and drop a couple of them right in. There's no need to heat up a huge wok full of oil, I think. I always make these in a small saucepan that I fill with maybe 2 to 3 centimeters of oil. That's it. That's how easy this can be. Make sure you put them in a bowl or a tray lined with paper towels to absorb the excess oil and let them cool down for, just a few minutes. Now, krupuk is definitely meant to be eaten like within a few hours because it's actually so dry it will absorb moisture from the air, and that's going to ruin the crispiness, which, let's be honest, that's all the fun. But if you really have to, you can put those in an airtight container or a Ziploc bag, and they should last for, at least a few days. But now, let me finally try one and see if they're as good as I think they are. Homemade prawn crackers, let's go. This is really good. They are unbelievably crispy. One of the craziest things is that the shrimp taste here is so intense. Like, it really tastes like a shrimp cracker. This is ridiculous. If you remember the recipe, I used like almost 50% shrimp for this. And the commercial one, this one, literally has 5%. So this has 10 times more shrimp than this. This one is actually so crispy, it's almost like crispy bordering on hard. But it's not hard, it's very... Oh, and I definitely need to see if this one sticks to my tongue. It sticks to my tongue. It's real krupuk. So much more flavor in these ones. Not just from the shrimp, but also from the roasted garlic, the 5-spice, the sesame oil. Yes, I can actually taste all of these things in here. Now, final verdict. The process of making krupuk is a little bit like lengthy, but it's not actually difficult, and it's super, super fun. And now that I have made like amazing shrimp crackers that are like 50% shrimp, I'm thinking, what other things could I be turning into crackers? Like, I would love to know what you guys would like to see me turn into a cracker. I think there's at least one very obvious choice. Let me know what you think, and I'm gonna see you in the next video. Thanks for watching, everybody.